What is it?
The main thing I got from it was like this sense of feeling seen and validated.
Well, why does it have to be this way?
This book was placed in my hand for this moment.
Insightful, learned a lot, wrote some quotes that I'm ready to like paint on my wall.
I love this book!
That we just kind of pull out some of the big themes that we see and talk about a few different ones.
I apologize if most of my contribution has K-pop references.
Alternative book title, The Feminine Mystique Part 2. You were really just gay all along. Welcome to Book Club.
With Julia!
And Victoria.
We are two lifelong friends who read a book and talk about it each episode.
This is a podcast where we explore new perspectives and use books as a tool for personal and community growth.
This week, we are reading And Then We Grew Up by Rachel Friedman. This is a nonfiction memoir that explores how former child artists sort of learn to adapt to the world that is not always kind to artists and how they cope with not necessarily, quote unquote, making it the way they might have imagined. It kind of explores creativity and stuff. So yeah, not a lot of spoilers, just a lot of, unfulfilled potential.
Buckle up, friends. Here we go. Earlier this summer, Julie and I were recording an episode of the podcast where I left feeling like my imposter syndrome was like an all-time high. And I was sitting talking to my partner afterwards, like crying to him, asking myself, like, am I good enough at this? Am I reaching my potential? Am I creating content that actually like connects with other people? Are we just shouting into the void and doesn't even matter that I'm not necessarily making money from this? Do I want to be making money from this? Like a lot of like existential creativity potential related questions. So I dried my tears and I told Varun, I'm gonna go walk to the bookstore and decompress. City Lit in Logan Square had recently reopened, so I walked over there and I browsed around and like just like the peace of being in a bookstore where like no one asks you any questions and you can just like look at pretty covers and read the backs of potentially interesting books. And I stumbled upon Rachel Friedman's book and I was like, oh my gosh, this is a sign from the universe. Like I need to read this book because on the cover it says, And Then We Grew Up, on creativity, potential, and the imperfect art of adulthood, which is literally like the three things I was like, crying about like an hour earlier. So I picked it up and I've been carrying this book like literally and figuratively with me ever since. I even like wrote in my notes before I sent the book to Julia, I'm like, I just want to be carrying this book around for a few weeks, but I have to send it to Julia so she can read it for the podcast, so I can't like physically carry it around. I felt like I brought it up to literally everyone I talked to. I was like, I'm reading this book right now. I had like a networking event with some new people I haven't met ever, and we were sharing like books we were reading, and I go on this whole tangent about like my unfulfilled career as a musician, and someone else really resonated with it too. Like she was also a music major who now doesn't do music things, so we related, but I was like, I'm just like bearing my soul to these like quite new friends. So a little background for me, I was in music lessons from an early age and I started playing the clarinet at 11. I learned after the fact that I was actually a third generation clarinetist.
Oh my God.
My mother and my grandmother had both played, and I played all through college. So I double majored with English literature, which many of you listeners know because we have a podcast about books and we talk about our experience in college. But I also double majored in music, clarinet performance specifically. So yeah, it was kind of like I've gone through like an emotional roller coaster of a breakup in a way with my clarinet, and like I still have a lot of weird identity stuff kind of that just comes up when I talk about like being a creative person and what I thought or I hoped I would be as a kid. And in a way, like writing also, like I grew up writing and reading a lot. My parents are still 100% convinced I'm going to publish a book someday. They're just like waiting for it. Like they're so encouraging. It's so sweet. But I'm also like, yeah, I'm not actually working on one. They're like, oh, but someday your book is going to get published. I'm like, what book? Like I literally don't know what you're talking about.
Oh my God.
So a lot of the stuff that Rachel Friedman talks about really hit hard for me as far as like the experience of growing up as a musical child and being super involved with that, having a rough go at it in college musically, and then eventually finding a career in writing. For her, it was more like writing, publishing, working in the publishing industry for an academic journal. For me, it's more marketing writing is where I've landed. And now podcasting, which we'll talk about too. Yeah, Julie, what was your experience reading and how I knew immediately, I'm like, Julia needs to read this book too because of your life story. So give us a little background there.
So Victoria would not shut up about this book. And the minute she started talking about it, I was like, oh yeah, this is going to be a good one for both of us, because I think part of what we've bonded over the years is like exactly what's in this book, and I think it tapped into something really, really deep for both of us. And, you know, that's like some identity shit that's like hard to dig up, you know, in terms of like you spend 18 years as some kind of artist and then suddenly you're not. And it's like, whoa. So anyway, Victoria recommended it. She sent it to me in the mail with this lovely little note that ends with, please return this. Which just had me cackling. I was like, it's sort of an inside joke about people not returning books, but also like I can tell this is like one of the most important books to her. So I read it here in Belgium in various parks, and it was an absolute delight. I didn't relate to the whole thing, but it was like really fascinating to see different people's perspectives, and there were some parts that I really related to. It was really fun to like see Victoria wrote like essays in the margins, which she doesn't normally do, so like that was really fun too. But in terms of my story, yeah, this book really tapped into like a very kind of deep and turbulent part of myself that like I think is still resolving. My dad's a musician and my mom is a teacher, but she is obsessed with books and she taught me how to write from a very young age. And then I started dancing when I was 4 years old. So I grew up like playing piano. I played violin until junior high, and then junior high I played cello, and then I was a dancer until I graduated high school. And that was like my main identity. It was like, I am a dancer. If someone asked me, like, what do you do with your time? Like, who are you? What's your defining features? Like, I am a dancer. It took precedent over everything in my life. But I knew that I couldn't handle being an artist as a profession. I just knew I couldn't do it with the amount of, with my energy levels and the social aspect of it and the networking and all that. Like, I just knew I couldn't do it. And so I kind of just quit cold turkey and went to become an English major, and it like almost broke me. I was not a person prone to crying, but if I started talking about dance 2 minutes in, I was sobbing. Like it was like it really messed me up, and I think I understand now better, and I'll talk about more later, like why it was so deep for me, because it wasn't like just a hobby. I tried to replace it with writing and it didn't quite work, but I think a lot of my friends have had similar experiences, and so I think I've like connected with people over that, and I think a lot of my adult life has been trying to find the way that dance made me feel without all the baggage. There's a lot of baggage that comes with dance, and to try and kind of tap into that essential part of myself again, but also to make a living and not be super stressed all the time about where my money's going to come from, which is, you know, a challenge. Yeah, that's kind of me, and trying to figure out how to incorporate the arts into my life in a way that doesn't break my heart. So, yeah.
I feel like, just to recap, there's no spoilers for this book, really, because, you know, it's a memoir, it's interviews, it's whatever. But I will tell you, this is some deep stuff for Julie and I. We'll see what comes up for us.
Yeah, we should put a warning on this. Like,
I know. Should I put like an emotional content warning? Like, Victoria may or may not tear up. Yeah.
This might turn into a therapy session. We don't know.
All that being said, though, it's interesting. Like, reading this book, it felt like it was just the right time, and it also felt like the right time to talk about it. Like, similar to you, Julia, there was a while where like I just couldn't talk about music or the musician that I used to be, or what I was going through with it. It would make me cry, and had many tearful conversations. Whereas I feel like, even though we joke like this might turn into a therapy session, I feel like I'm removed enough and I'm learning to have more perspective on it, especially through reading this book, to be in a place to like talk about it. Which is usually how people talk about trauma, now that I say that. Like, you know, I'm removed enough from the situation. I have my coping skills. I have words for this. We've done therapy, like actual therapy. And I'm ready to talk about it. So Anyways, here we go. So Rachel Friedman, we get a lot of her like life story as it connects to the topic of this book through the memoir, so I won't go into too much of it, but a little bit of her as a writer. She's an author of The Good Girl's Guide to Getting Lost, a memoir of 3 continents, 2 friends, and 1 unexpected adventure. That was her first book that came out in 2011. And Then We Grew Up came out in 2019 by Penguin Books. And she has essays and articles that have appeared in several publications. She graduated from University of Pennsylvania and then went on later to get a creative nonfiction MFA from Rutgers, Newark. She has taught literature, journalism, and writing at several universities, including Columbia University and NYU, and she currently lives in Brooklyn with her son. That's a very brief synopsis of where you might have heard of her as a writer. But Julia, this kind of like leads in. I was like reviewing your little summary premise you came up with. I'm like, well, those are all the things I would have said in her bio. So here we go.
Yeah, so the summary of the book is also partially her story, right? Because this is sort of a memoir, kind of journalistic. So it feeds right into the summary. So the author, Rachel, is barely making rent as a freelance writer, and she's going through a divorce, and she's just has this kind of quarter life crisis moment because she realizes she's like so far removed from the kind of artist in New York lifestyle that she imagined for herself. She grew up playing viola very, very seriously and spent her summers at this special camp for talented young artists in the woods called Interlaken. So as she's reminiscing about that and trying to reconcile herself, her current self, with the person she imagined she'd be and kind of her identity as a kid, she decides to contact all her old Interlaken friends and kind of see what they're doing as adults, whether they've stuck with the art form that they studied as kids, how they're coping with being a creative person and trying to bring that into whatever career they've chosen, and even if maybe they've abandoned their original art form, and how they're sort of finding a new identity as a creative adult, even if, you know, they've lost that original art, that original part of themselves. And through the process of talking to all these different people, and she brings in a bunch of extra research that she's done as well, you sort of watch her learn. You kind of learn along with her, like, what are the different ways of coping with that kind of loss of that identity, that art form, that creativity, that thing you imagined of yourself. And I think she comes to a very almost kind of zen conclusion of like accepting the nuances and the ambiguity and reconciling herself with that loss. And yeah, so we're gonna kind of walk through that process and pick out some parts that we really connected with.
This podcast is made possible by our wonderful book club members. You can support the show by becoming a member on buymeacoffee.com/bookclubwithjv. So Julie and I are readers. We like to talk about books, but we're also writers. And so with our book club members, we love to share newsletters of things happening in our personal lives, as well as essays, poetry, other things we're writing. So, starting at $3 per month, book club members can connect with fellow listeners, help us select books for future episodes, unlock exclusive newsletters, poems, etc. that we write, and get early and discounted access to future events. If you want to take your support to the next level, you can also join the TISM tier, which starts at $5 per month. The TISM tier is all about autism. Are you an autistic person looking for community, a possible neurodiverse person looking for resources, or an ally hoping to learn from an actually autistic person? Members of this tier get access free to Julia's autism-related articles on Medium. The best part of any book club, besides the books, is the community. So join us in our growing community of book nerds by becoming a member of the book club today. You can follow the link in our show notes or go to buymeacoffee.com/bookclubwithjv to join the party. Now back to the books. Yeah, I, like Julia mentioned, I have lots of thoughts on this book. She has lots of thoughts on this book. We've kind of boiled it down, though, for this episode to talk about like 3 big concepts or takeaways we had from the book. And these are definitely the ones that kind of like float around the most in my brain, even though it's been about a month or two, or about a month since I read this book. Like, these are the things that still feel like super fresh and like continue to inform perhaps my evolving thinking about who I am as a creative person.
Yeah, I think we both wrote like pages and pages and pages and pages of notes and just like our whole life story. And then we got on the phone over the weekend and we were like, this isn't gonna fit into an hour.
Yeah, like this is like the beginning outline of a memoir I write someday. Perhaps that's the book my parents believe I'm gonna write.
There you go.
Because I'm like, this is just all autobiographical. Let's talk about the book we're reading. So the first concept, it's actually one of the earliest chapters, is about art monsters. And Rachel Friedman kind of talks about this idea of an art monster, someone who's like so consumed with their art form and they wholly single-mindedly focused, even sometimes at the expense of others around them, but like serving the art in everything they do. And that is what she believed made a good artist. So like as a young violist, it was like she has to only ever be focused on this, but she had other interests. There's other things she wanted to do, and it was told to her in direct language and even indirect language from other musicians and teachers and other students, like, if you're not 100% into this, you're not going to make it. You're not going to make the cut. And so she first starts exploring like what is this art monster, and is it actually true that you have to be this single-mindedly focused person in order to be good at what you do? So she meets up with who she refers to as Jenna, who is a friend from Interlaken who was an amazing violinist and was, first chair, top of everything she was doing, like really, really good. Could have been on track to be like a soloist. So not just like getting a gig with a full-time orchestra, but like touring internationally, perhaps. Maybe that was the trajectory she was on. But when Rachel meets up with Jenna, Jenna is a music teacher in Chicago. She's married, she has a young child, and her partner perform in like a local folk band, and she does fiddling and really enjoys it. And like Rachel keeps kind of poking and prodding and like trying to get Jenna to admit like, oh, you're missing out on something, or you wish you had something different. And Jenna is actually very content with the way that her life has balanced out to give her the thing she wants. And she even has a comment like, oh yeah, like if this like big band offered me to go on tour with them, I don't know what I would do, but like that's not really an option on the table. So like I don't need to spend time wondering and wishing and shaming myself for not being something else instead of embracing like what she does have. And this was the first essay I wrote in the margins of this book, was this idea of art monster. And I remember being told explicitly and implicitly, like, every day you're not practicing, you're sliding backward in your technique. And for me, technique was like what I saw as the thing holding me back from being great. Like I had the tone, I had the performance ability, I had the dedication, but like, I just like don't have the technique. And so it became not just like an art monster idea for me, but like a shame monster of like, I'm not good enough. Like, oh, you took a break, like you should have been practicing. Like, oh, you're messing up that passage in rehearsal. It's because you aren't doing enough. You're not single-mindedly focused enough on getting good at this. So yeah, it was interesting to have words, I guess, to that concept, to be able to just kind of say like, oh, art monster, and like I understand kind of what she's getting at.
Oh man, yeah, the whole if you're not practicing, you're backsliding, like you're getting worse, is like permeates a lot of the arts. I mean, I heard that all the time. And the thing that sucked too was like you could feel it, if you took more than a week off. Like you go into class and all of a sudden like my back muscles don't work the same. I can't hold an arabesque at the same height anymore. And I'm like, well, I guess they're right, like if you're not doing this every single day, you're not going to be able to keep up. And I did that, especially when I was in like junior high, when my classes weren't very hard. Like I would get all my homework done at school so that I could dance all day because my classes were really easy. So I was like dancing constantly. I was taking every single class that I could. I was in our like jazz competition team and also our like pre-professional ballet company. Every single day of the week, I was in the studio. And it's funny because like I did have that kind of glamorized art monster ideal in my head. And, I've come to learn as a kid, you can kind of be an art monster because you don't have any responsibilities aside from being good at the thing your parents pay for and like not failing school. Like, those are your responsibilities. Like, you can spend all your time dancing if you want. I could, and I wanted to, and it was great. But like, as an adult, there are all these other things that are required. Like, you can't be an art monster without harming your own well-being, your own health, putting your own ability to eat and be housed at risk, and then also ruining all of your relationships. The thing that kind of drives me crazy is that like glamorized kind of bohemian artist lifestyle that we get from largely male authors and representative male artists is that you have to be so rich to be able to live well as someone who just makes art for a living, or you have to be really lucky and really talented, right? And just be in the right place at the right time and get that one job that's available where you can like pay rent with it and stuff. But the kind of art monster where like all you think about all the time is your art, that you have no concern for mortal things, right? You end up being miserable. You hurt everyone in your life and yourself. And it requires so many people to be propping up those artists, keeping them alive. Typically male artists, there are usually women in their lives keeping them alive, and family money that they've inherited, right? So, or a house or something, right? And it's really, really difficult. I have so many friends who went and tried to be dancers in New York or LA or San Francisco. You know, most of them did not have any money to start with. So they're working like 3 jobs and then dancing for free to like trying to network and make connections and try and schmooze their way up to a job that has like health insurance, because there aren't very many of those. And most of them, especially during COVID, ended up quitting over the time because the ones that could keep going were either the really lucky, really talented ones, or the ones that had a ton of family money so they could pay rent with their family's money and then audition 24/7. And so, like, it's really not a healthy thing to be. I feel like I kind of recognized that from a pretty young age, that it, like, wasn't a lifestyle that I could handle. And that was one of the major reasons why I decided not to pursue it as a career, which just really sucks, because it's like, well, we'll get into this more, but you should be able to do your art. Like the fact that I had to be a very practical 17-year-old and be like, well, I'm terrible at networking and I don't have enough energy to work multiple jobs and dance. You know, that's like more than a full-time job. That's like 2 full-time jobs. And so I just wouldn't make it. I would be miserable. Like, that's really sad that you kind of have to make that compromise with yourself. It's like either do the thing you love or survive. And yeah, that sucks.
Yeah, that kind of takes us into the next section we want to talk about. So there's 2 chapters that have similar titles that we'll talk about together. Never quit, but maybe quit. And never compromise, but definitely compromise. These kind of like conflicting ideas that happen in a lot of artistic professions of you're never supposed to quit, you're never supposed to give up. If you quit, it's a failure in many ways. Even if that's not explicitly said, it's like just embedded in the culture, you know, like music programs or artistic programs that are set up to be very competitive and like weed out people is trying to like force people to get to that like make or break situation, whether it's for their own good. I don't know. I take issue a lot with some of the culture around these programs.
Well, yeah, how many, like, Juilliard actors or dancers do you hear, like, they do interviews, and they're like, oh, yeah, after my first year at Juilliard, I hated my art. And you're like, what the hell is this school for, then? Yeah, really so sad. Horrible.
Yeah, so this idea of, like, quitting and giving up, Rachel kind of explores, and the tag of that title, but maybe quit. And she talks about what does quitting look like? What does quitting tell us about ourselves? She interviews a friend, Sarah, who was a flautist, who had a professional career as a flautist, and realized she was absolutely miserable. Like, she was having to deal with these, like, social politics of these ensembles that was, like, make or break for her, you know? Like, if this ensemble leader doesn't like her, that means she won't get a job.
Mm-hmm.
And she's like, I don't want to live this life anymore. She put her flute away. She focused on her son. And that was kind of it. And so you kind of, Rachel's talking with her in this period of her life where it's been a little bit since she's quit, but she hasn't yet, like, she's still in the process of, like, working through what that all means for her. This one study that Rachel Friedman quotes, it was over 200 professional musicians who responded to this survey. And one of the outcomes, or one of the findings, was that music making is therapeutic, but making a career out of music is destructive. That kind of idea of, like, you're pushing yourself so hard, there's, like, not a lot of structure in place that is making it consistently accessible for people. In this chapter, Friedman gets a lot into the kind of what Julia was talking about too, the privilege that comes with pursuing a creative career and the disparities there. So even though there might be a program that's helping students who can't afford instruments or can't afford lessons, like, get access to those things, it doesn't necessarily mean they will have access to the continued long-term supports they would need to make a career out of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my dad was a professional musician. Still, well, he's officially retired from the symphony, and it was a sad day. But he told us all the time, my brother and I, don't become a professional musician. Like, he's straight up told us that. He got us really, really nice instruments and, like, took us to all the best lessons and was, like, super supportive and helped us practice and whatever. But he was like, don't do this for a living. And I always thought that was so strange. I was like, but you do it for a living. But then the more I've learned about, like, his career path, success in music is, like, so contingent on who you know and being in the right place at the right time. And, like, no one explains that to you. You just have to, like, be really, really good at playing the game. And it's, like, horrible that talent isn't really what, and this is true for most art forms these days, is that raw talent is not the only thing that will ensure your success. It's the people who know how to navigate the social politics. They're the ones who succeed. And, you know, if you grow up without people explaining that to you, without the kind of access that maybe you needed, you know, as a kid, like, my dad just had no support. He had to pay for everything himself. You know, no one explained networking to him. He was just like, I like playing this instrument. So yeah, the more I learned about that, by the time I graduated high school, I was like, oh yeah, this sounds horrible. I definitely don't want to do this for a living.
One section that I really liked in the Never Quit chapter was Rachel proposes, like, shouldn't there be a class for, like, college students or maybe high school seniors even, about, like, how to quit? Like, how to recognize when enough is enough, I'm going to do something else. And, like, this isn't necessarily, it doesn't have to be these complex identity, like, existential dramas that we write them for ourselves to be when we quit or move on from something. She writes something about the class, about how to gracefully quit something you've given a good go and no longer want to invest in. I think that's also a big thing for me. It always came up as, like, well, I've already put in this much time, which is, like, a silly thing to say when you're 20, but it felt like that. It's like, I've been playing music for more than half my life at this point.
Yeah.
This is the only thing I've stuck with this long. I was the kind of kid who wanted to try everything, which was really fun. I did 1 year of ballet, 1 year of soccer, a few years of basketball, like, but music was the through line. So I was like, well, I've already dedicated all this time. And even now, sometimes I'm like, I'll find myself flippantly saying to myself or even to others, like, oh yeah, like, I probably didn't need to do that music degree. Like, what a waste of time, or what an interesting use of all that energy for it to come to nothing. When it's like, well, that's not true. Like, there's still so much I learned and gained from that. And a more healthy reframing has been like, I gave it a good go and I'm no longer as interested as I used to be. There's other things that I'd rather spend my time doing. So I'm going to let go of shaming myself that I haven't played my clarinet in, like, 6 months.
Yeah. Okay. I feel like I'm a bit different because, like, I'm very good at quitting things.
Oh yeah, Julia's my go-to when I have to quit something. I'm like, Julia, I cannot do it. I took this job opportunity and now I think I need to quit it. I don't know how to do it. She's like, just literally, here, I'll help you. Let's write this email. You're going to quit today. And I'm like, okay.
And I, like, celebrate it. I'm like, yay, let's have a quitting party. Like, I'm the biggest fan of quitting things. even as a teenager, like I was I had some undiagnosed conditions to do with, I had undiagnosed autism, so that, you know, impacted my ability to socialize and network and kind of deal with that side of things. Also really limited the time I could spend around people. And then I also had another chronic condition that causes a lot of fatigue. And so my energy reserves were like very, very limited. And so I had to be extremely picky. Like I knew this about myself, even if I couldn't put it into words exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Like the best way I could explain it was like, I need a lot of sleep and I need a lot of alone time, is how I would explain it. And now I have labels for things, but in order to survive, I had to be super protective of my boundaries. And so like I started quitting like junior year of high school. I quit a couple classes so that I could have a day off from dance, and I quit the jazz competition team. So I only did the ballet company, and my teachers were like floored. They were just like, "What are you doing? You are not in tap class. What are you doing?" And I was just like, "I can't do it." And they're like, "What do you mean you can't do it? You have to do it." I'm like, "No, I can't do it." And they learned to accept it, even if they didn't understand. And so I feel like I was almost a little bit too good at quitting in the sense that like going away to college and deciding what I was going to major in and how I was going to spend my time was a really, really tough decision, because like I knew I had to set a boundary on myself. It was like I could not survive for 2 seconds as a professional dancer, whether I quote unquote make it or not. Both of them seem very difficult. Like the politics of a dance company is just as fraught as like the networking that you have to do in order to try and get gigs and be like a freelancer. I knew I couldn't do it in terms of my energy, in terms of my social abilities. But then I cut myself off from it completely and would then try to take some classes, like some hobbyist classes in college. And I didn't fully appreciate how it would feel to watch my abilities decline, or to see how I could be spending my time dancing all the time. I had a lot of friends in college, and still do, who were dance majors, and a few of them are still professionals in the field. And to be right up next to it and to be taking a dance class here and there, but to not be doing it all the time, and that proximity was really, really hard. And it wasn't a limitation of ability or interest. Like I was still interested in doing the thing itself. I love to dance to this day. And I love talking about it, and I love watching it, and I love doing it, and I love everything about it. I love teaching it. So I'm not limited by my interest. I'm limited by the realities of being an artist in capitalism, where like when you start having to monetize your art, you run into some difficult things. And, when you have a limited number of, like, I have fewer work hours in the day, hours where I can be like on and active and focused and doing work. And so I need to make those hours count. I need those hours to be worth a lot of money. And working as an artist, your hours are not worth a lot of money. And so it's like, I'm really constrained by kind of those realities. Similar to, I think the flautist, right, who tried to do it professionally and had to quit because, like, she couldn't handle the, like, social, emotional side of it. Even the musician at the end who, like, did, quote-unquote, make it, right? She's playing viola at, like, a major symphony. But even she's, like, yeah, I don't think I can do this forever. I'm looking for other things, because it grinds you down. So I think I was maybe a little too good at quitting, but I also just kind of know the realities of it, and it really sucks. I think that's it. I think that's everything I wanted to say about that.
Kind of tying in the compromising section. In that section, you hear Rachel talk with Daniel, who was a screenwriter and needed something else to like pay the bills. And so he started working at a special effects studio and really loved it. And like is okay that it takes away from his writing and like really doesn't seem to care too much because he is really excited about the work that they do there. And even though it might look like, you know, someone could paint the story that, oh, he had to like sell out or he had to compromise on his dream, like for him it's like, but I'm still fulfilled, you know, like I found something that works for me even if it's not what I thought it was going to be. And I really resonated with his story because I feel like the path I've taken so far in my career has still kept me tethered somewhat to this like creative part of me that I feel excited about, and I can use it whether it's, you know, maybe I'm not like a writer in the way that I have a bunch of bylines being published, but in the sense that as a marketer and a podcaster, I'm like constantly writing things and pushing that creative energy through things that pay the bills. And even though we can tell ourselves like it's a compromise, there's trade-offs, it's like, but the trade-offs can be really nice. And like there's more, I guess I'm realizing too as I continue to grow up, like it's, you're creating like the whole life you want to have, not just like this one through line story of like I have to be a creative person. It's like, well, I've already realized like I enjoy several things. I'm not a solely one track mind kind of person in my pursuits. So if I find work that fits my personality and my preferred way of life that also taps into this creative thing, like that feels like a really nice place to be. Compromise doesn't have to be a bad thing.
Yeah, I think compromise has a really negative connotation, but the way she presents it in the book, and I think too the way that we've sort of learned to experience it, is like compromise is about finding what works for you. And that's not really a skill that they explain that you're going to have to do as an adult when you're a kid. But it's a really important and kind of difficult growing pain kind of process. I think in a lot of ways, this podcast has been that for both of us, of like finding a creative outlet that doesn't have any baggage with it, you know?
We were not child prodigy podcasters.
Yeah. Podcasting didn't exist when we were children. And so it's totally new. It's kind of a blank slate. And so we can channel some of our creative energy into it. And we're, I think, a lot wiser now on like what we want our creative outputs to look like. And so we set really clear expectations of like when we're no longer enjoying it, we either change it or we stop, right? And so anytime, every season, we kind of sit down and examine like, okay, do we like the responsibilities that we have? Is there something that's really stressful that we need to change? We've made so many adaptations to our process so that it's never painful to make this show, you know? And I think also doing it as a team, it helps with a lot of the holdups that I have in terms of energy and like the social side of making art that really limits me. You really help with that. And then I think, you know, you've talked about how you prefer to do things in a team. And so now you have a team, right? And so we sort of figured out what works for us when we're making something. And we've created that for ourselves. And so it's not what we originally may have imagined, but it's very fulfilling.
Yeah, I totally agree. Like the idea that the foundation of this project is like, are we enjoying this? Are we learning and growing from this? And the fact that both of us were like relatively new at this, there wasn't any like pre-built ego of like, no, I have to be the audio editor. Like we literally have completely switched roles from when we first started because like we just figured out what works for us. And it feels like this nice blend of like creativity. There's still like a public performance aspect without the like, I guess, need for perfection in certain ways because we do keep to a pretty regular schedule of like, well, the episode's going to come out. Like I can't sit around fiddling with it for days and days and days because Julia's like, hey, that we just need to get it out there. Like we don't need to like, I think from the get-go, we kind of built this podcast around like, we want to go do the thing and not get caught up on the perfectionism element of it, which is what I had been stuck on because I'd been fiddling around with another podcast idea for like months before I pitched this one to you, but I never made the other one actually happen because I didn't have that like external team accountability that I really thrive with. So yeah, I feel like at the end of the book, Rachel Friedman kind of comes to some similar conclusions too about everyday creativity, and she talks with a former friend or old friend from Interlochen Dahlia, who has not pursued a creative career in the same way that others have, but instead kind of lives her life imbued with creativity and art, and she kind of like has that flow of creativity in her life that isn't channeled into her career. And while there might be some like potential mindset shifts or kind of like a quote unquote let down around that, like, oh, my life didn't become what I thought it was going to be, she's found this like way that really works for her. Like we've been talking about, like finding what actually works for you instead of what you tell yourself you should be doing. I really liked her, like hearing about her journey as well.
Yeah, since my autism diagnosis, I've been kind of spending a lot of time re-examining my relationship to dance in particular, but like arts in general, because it's like something that I'm really connected to, but have a complicated relationship with, as we've explored. And I think the autism piece was a huge kind of missing piece that I hadn't considered until recently, in that I used dance as a form of kind of nervous system regulation and emotional regulation, and like having that consistency and that kind of single-minded focus on an art, but also just the process of moving my body to music was something that I was doing before I started dancing. Like that's kind of how I stim. Like if you know what stimming is, it's like a kind of repetitive movement that helps your brain process information. And especially if I'm dealing with feelings, the way that I do that is through movement, often to music. And so dance was like kind of, it felt good in my bones. You know what I mean? It wasn't just like, I like how this looks or I like making this, which I did, but it was also a crucial part of how I operated as a person, which I didn't understand until years and years later when I've been kind of looking back on it. And so a big part of my journey in finding that kind of everyday creativity is kind of learning to listen to my body again and listen to like, I've got this feeling, I'm going to find the song that I need and I'm going to let myself move around and not think about it too much and just kind of go with my instincts and my own intuition. And what I really want, I think I'm still working on, is this kind of inherent creativity of like being a human being. I really want to see if I can find it so I can put in the show notes, but I saw this article, essay, I'm sure it was like on social media somewhere and I didn't get the link and I'm really mad at myself, but it was kind of an alternative look at cave paintings. And so it was a suggestion that like maybe the cave itself where things were painted, or the various caves, weren't sacred locations. It wasn't about the location. It was just that was where the art would get preserved the best, right? And that actually maybe human beings just turned the entire world into their canvas and were just painting everywhere. And there is some evidence of that, like in various locations around the world, you can see art on rocks and such outside. And even if that's not true, like about that specific theory, like I love it, kind of clicked for me of like, yeah, this isn't something that's just about doing a specific art for a specific amount of time to get a specific result, you know, and to earn a living or to be that type of person, to be a dancer or whatever. It's about like, it's a core part of being a human, making things and moving and feeling music and making sounds, and like, that's like what we do, you know? And that's how we connect with other people. That's how we feel alive. And so like, I'm trying to listen to those instincts more and just kind of go with them wherever they pop up. And it's really hard because there's a lot of baggage tied to it, you know, and there's a lot of external expectations and definitions, and you know, I get in my head about it, but I'm trying to learn how to do that more for like my own health, but also just happiness, I guess.
Yeah, it reminds me of earlier this summer, or I guess earlier this year sometime, Varun was, he dabbles with guitar and was like, oh, trying to learn some like jazz guitar. I really appreciated his outlook as someone who's just like, I'm just having fun learning. Like, I'm just trying. I'm like, oh, you sweet soul. You have no baggage on this like I do.
Yeah.
But he's like, wouldn't it be fun just to like have a little improv session? So I pulled out my clarinet and we muddled our way through a few things. And I was an orchestral clarinetist, and so I did not do much improvising ever. So it was also good just to kind of like tap into something that I like was familiar with, but it wasn't like, didn't carry the same baggage, I guess, as trying to, sight read some music. And it was so fun. I realized like there's so much that, that shame story I tell myself, like, oh, I'm not practicing, therefore like all the skill I had is gone. It's gone. But as soon as I pick it up, it's like, okay, well, you don't just forget. It's like riding a bike, So it's just like this very like beautiful moment and being able to share with my partner. And then I start crying, of course, and Julia comes in. She's like, oh my gosh, you okay? And I'm like, I just got to play music, and it was just fun. Like, it was just purely fun. And so I feel like it was kind of that step forward and perhaps finding eventually what will be a more healthy relationship to my art.
It was particularly exciting to hear because prior to that moment, I was not allowed to acknowledge that Victoria ever picked up her clarinet. She just didn't. I would be like, oh, what were you playing? Or like, oh, you sounded good. She'd be like, don't talk to me about it. It's complicated. And I'd be like, oh, okay. And so that was the first time you were like, I liked that. So that was really exciting to see.
So my clarinet is sitting at my parents' house now. I did have a tearful moment as I like put it in their car, because since Froon and I are traveling for a while, it was just another thing that, one, it's very expensive and needs climate controlled environment, and I was like, I don't feel like we should be traveling the country with this. But I realized it was the first time I didn't have it like on my person since I got it, like even like I always like flew to and from college with it. I would take it even after college. I always took it home for the holidays because my mom's like favorite thing is for my brothers and I to be a little band and play some Christmas carols for her. So yeah, it was kind of an emotional moment. If this was, my memoir instead of Rachel Friedman's memoir, I think it would this chapter would end with that little jam session. But our lives do not end at the end of a memoir. It'll continue to grow and change. We'll see. Check in a year and be like, Victoria, how do you feel about music? And I might have a totally different take than I do now.
Oh, yeah.
So let's move into some recommendations. So Rachel Friedman quotes and cites so many different books and articles and studies. Like Julie mentioned, it's almost a journalistic approach to this. It's kind of straddles the line between journalism and memoir. So there's a few books that she recommended that I'm excited to check out. I have not read yet. 2 books by Adam Phillips. One is On Balance, and one is called Missing Out in Praise of the Unlived Life. Even those titles alone, I'm like, oh my gosh, I need to read that. Danny Shapiro's book, Still Writing, as well as a collection of writings edited by Manjula Martin called Scratch, Writer's Money and the Art of Making a Living. Those ones were quoted often and really resonated with me, those parts that she pulled out. So I look forward to checking those out more in depth. One collection of essays I read recently that really, I read them back to back with this book, so they just kind of spoke to each other. It could have been a little mini class syllabus I was putting together reading these 2 books. But Having and Being Had is a collection of essays by Eula Biss. It's actually recommended to us by our listener Claire. Thank you, Claire. Biss's essay collection is kind of a conversation on capitalism and property ownership, as well as academia and writing for a living. Probably a little bit more philosophical than And Then We Grew Up, but again had similar themes that had me really contemplating like the privilege of being an academic or an artist in our capitalist society, kind of privileges you have to be able to even have those concerns or questions about potential and creativity. And lastly, a friend of the podcast, Evening Crickets, is a channel by Emma Ruth Smart. You've probably, if you listen back in our episodes, you'll have heard Emma Smart a few times as a guest here. She has a new YouTube channel, and her first full-length video was Analysis Interpretations of Fine Line, the album by Harry Styles.
Incredible.
It is absolutely wonderful. Emma and I are both products of the same undergrad music program. So the beginning, when she talks about her journey with music and as a musician, she started her career as a professional opera singer and has since had a shift away from that, was really really great to hear in her video. I mean, a lot of resonance with the book we read today for the podcast. I mean, the rest of her analysis is great too, but just the first few minutes is the story part that might resonate with listeners.
I really just have one recommendation. So there's a bit of a story to this piece. So when I was studying abroad in London, I took this class called dance theater. We watched a bunch of performances that sort of straddled the line between dance and theater. And one of them was a recording of this quote unquote piece from the Paris Opera Ballet, in which this woman who's retiring kind of tells her story. And she was in the corps de ballet her whole life. She never got promoted. She had a horrible back injury somewhere in the middle and had to recover for a long time. And she's got a little Brittany mic and kind of explains what it's like being in the corps and what it's like, kind of what her relationship with dance is like. And now that she's retiring and she's only not even maybe 40, has, so much of her life ahead of her. And we watched this piece for class, and I watched it and started bawling my eyes out. I was just a wreck. And I ended up writing this really long blog post at the time. And it's one of my favorite things I've ever written about the abusive relationship that most people have with dance. Because it just, even if you're successful, it just kind of breaks you down. And what level of success is success, and all these other questions. And I feel like she addresses that really well. And it's a really, really cool piece. So I found it on YouTube. It's called Veronique Doisneau. I think that's how you say her name. So I'm going to link it in the show notes if you're interested. It probably won't make you cry. I've watched it again and I'll be like, why did I cry about this? This is not sad. But I was very upset the first time.
So, shifting gears, things that we are currently obsessed with, things that bring us joy.
So, this is a musician, rapper, artist person that I literally just discovered today, as of 2 hours ago. So, this is very fresh, but I just got so excited about it. So, band called Wheelchair Sports Camp. They make what they call crip hop, so it's a group of disabled people, and the lead rapper, she is in a wheelchair, and they make music about that, and it's quite good. And they have this one song called Hard Out There for a Gimp, a play on It's Hard Out There for a Pimp, which is a famous hip-hop song. Anyway, and she's got so many good jokes. She's got kind of this sarcasm to the whole thing that's really funny, but also addresses a lot of the difficulties that disabled people face in society, and about her personal experiences. It's really, really cool. Anyway, so yeah, I would recommend that song and just looking into her and the stuff that she's made.
I have a few. So, Kowetku Coffee Company, for all my fellow coffee snobs out there, they're a local Chicago-based roaster. They were founded by Kenyan immigrants, and they've roast a lot of Kenyan coffees. Found them recently this summer as Rune and I were going to the Hyde Park Farmers Market. They were there every week, and we've been enjoying their beans. So if you're in the Chicagoland area and you're looking for a new coffee roaster to check out, definitely recommend Kowetku. We'll link in the show notes the spelling of that. Also recently, I was reintroduced to Sam Trump, who's a jazz R&B musician that I actually had seen previously at one of my favorite bars that closed down due to the pandemic, RIP, the California Clipper. And I remember seeing him there and looking him up and be like, man, we should see more of his shows. And then literally forgot about him until just yesterday. I was at the Hyde Park Jazz Fest, and Sam Trump, I was like, oh my gosh, I recognize his name. I recognize his hair. His music is great. You can find him all over Spotify and whatnot, but really enjoying his music. And last but not least, I talked about in our last episode, but I'm going to plug it again. You can join me on Storygraph. I would love to see what you're reading. Right now, I'm following literally everyone who participates in our book club reading challenge, which there are 4 of you out there, and I think you're great. Book Club with Julia and Victoria reading challenge. You can search through all the challenges or browse under Book Club's podcasts and publications. You'll find us there. And if you're looking for me specifically, I'm at Victoria from Book Club, and I love Storygraph. I've gone through many modes of trying to track my reading because I am that kind of reader that wants to know. I found an old journal of mine that like I recorded every book and my thoughts and like ratings for like a year. Didn't keep that up. I used to use Goodreads, never kept up with that. Used to use a spreadsheet, but that was a lot of manual work. So Storygraph is like the happy in between of all three of those approaches to tracking reading. And I love the connection element. Would love to see what you're reading too. Yeah. But thanks for joining us on this emotional walkthrough.
Oof. Yeah, you probably just got way more information than you expected.
Yeah, we're growing up and we're learning as we go.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening to Book Club with Julia and Victoria. We would love to hear your thoughts on this book or the topic we discussed, so you can share your review and recommendations with us on Instagram at BookClubWithJV, on our website, bookclubwithjv.com, or by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts. You can also visit our website for show notes with links to all of the recommendations and the things bringing us joy. If you don't already, go ahead and follow us on whichever podcast platform you are listening on so that you can be notified when our next episode is released. This episode was co-hosted and produced by myself, Victoria Bruick, along with Julia Clausen. Rebecca Gasme provides us with project management support. Our music is composed by Greg Bruick, and our logo was designed by Gabby Fabland. Until next time, happy reading.